Hello, and welcome to Living Well. We are going to be dealing with an issue that is probably the most important issue to the survival of the planet and the survival of all life on the planet. It sounds like a big deal, and it is. What we're going to be doing is talking with the author of the book, The Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life. His name is Arthur Firstenberg, and he has some information and personal experiences that pretty much outline what most of the planet is going to be experiencing as we go forward. We know that the planet itself is in peril. But when we think about peril, we usually think about climate change, we usually think about nuclear war, but few people, far too few people, think about the one thing that is global and absolutely everywhere and is continuing to degrade life at every level. So we are going to visit the Invisible Rainbow with Arthur Firstenberg. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I would like for you to tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and what brought you to this subject.
I was going to be a doctor. I went to medical school in 1978, and during my third year of medical school, an event occurred that changed my life. I had an overdose of X-rays, which altered my life from 1 second to the next. And when I returned to the hospital the next day, I could feel electricity at a distance from virtually all electrical equipment, especially diagnostic medical equipment. And I was unable to stay in medical school because it made me too sick. And instead of being a doctor, I began to study the effects of electromagnetic radiation on organisms and eventually also on the environment. And that was in 1981 that I quit school, and I lived a normal life until 1996 by being careful. But after 1996, with the explosion of cell phone technology and cell towers, it was no longer possible to live any semblance of a normal life, and I started an organization called the Cellular Phone Task Force. That has been in existence now 21 years. I also started research for what became the book that I just published, which is a history, an environmental history of electricity. Electricity is something that has become, as Shaman said, probably the most urgent environmental threat to our planet, because we are now broadcasting it freely through the air without thinking. But most people don't even think of it as an environmental factor at all. And that is the reason for my book. The other reason, urgent reason for my book, is the fact that we are shortly, if we don't put a stop to it, going to be subject to global microwave rain from literally thousands and thousands of satellites for the sole purpose of providing wireless internet access to every furthest reach of the Earth. And that is what I consider probably the most urgent threat to our planet at this time.
One of the things I'd like very much to point out is in your book, you deal with the issues of the degradation of life forms that we don't think of as being necessary for the maintenance of life. For example, the bee, the frogs, the toads, the monarch butterflies. Can you just for a moment dive into that and let us take a look at how cellular phone technology is impacting life now?
Well, a lot of people are concerned about the bees. Colony collapse disorder became more or less a household word back in 2006, 2007, I believe. People have been concerned because bees are necessary to the pollination of crops, and they've been dying off and becoming much harder for beekeepers to maintain their hives for the past decade than ever before for no apparent reason. As I go into in my book, Chapter 8, Mystery on the Isle of Wight, the bees on the Isle of Wight, an island off the southern coast of England, began dying off in the exact same way that they are today, but only on that small island in 1904, after Marconi built the world's first permanent radio station on that island, and a number of other transmitters started transmitting from that island, and the bees started dying off for no apparent reason. And I go into the whole history of bee disorders from that point until today in Chapter 15.
Now, you also talk about other forms of life, again, that most people don't consider necessities or in some way playing a major role in the balance of life on Earth. For example, there's a very special frog called the golden frog. I believe it's in Peru, has become extinct, and that was considered a very bad sign.
Well, actually, scores of species of amphibians, both frogs and toads, have become extinct worldwide in the past few decades, again, for no apparent reason. And it's alarming because amphibia is a family that is very ancient and has been on this planet much longer than we have. And if they are dying off, again, for no apparent reason, that has to be a warning sign. And we have to find out the cause, and I believe we do know the cause. Part of the cause is the installation of some of the world's most powerful radar facilities in the middle of the most pristine forests and rainforests in the world. And again, because electricity and because broadcast electricity, meaning radio waves, is not considered by most people to be an environmental factor at all, it's being done without thought. And without thought to where, without thought to how powerful it is, without monitoring of species, and it has actually become a catastrophe. Few of us throughout the world are monitoring this, but this is not getting into the mainstream.
We have done several shows on the impact of radio waves and the impact specifically of cell phones. What I would like to point out is in your book, you do deal with the early stages of how electricity became accepted as a norm. For example, the putting up of telephone wires in London, and I think it was 1869. What was it?
That's about right, yes.
So we are now facing another kind of norm where you will look out and you'll see along the landscape huge cell phone towers. Does it impact people's health when you are living near or having that kind of presence in your life?
Well, it demonstrably does, yes. The proliferation, and this is also in my book, the chapter on cell towers is the very last chapter, that when these towers were built in 1996 and 1997 in this country, it happened a little earlier in Europe and some other parts of the world, there was a spike in mortality and disease, in morbidity and mortality, lasting 2 to 2.5 months on average in each city where this service first came. And actually, this is not in my book, but I've written about it elsewhere, that afterwards, the mortality level